Hello, and welcome to the Screen Composer Studio, a podcast about the musical storytellers behind some of your favorite films, shows, video games, and more. I'm your host, Adrian Ellis. Brian and Caleb Chan bring a high level of emotional intelligence to everything they do, and believe that a focus on that growth is critical to success in both life and creative business. When you understand that their attention to the inner world carries over into the work that they do as musicians and storytellers, you realize it's no accident that they've been so successful. They also seem to avoid being pigeonholed, and their work spans from the horror of Sam Raimi's 50 States of Fright to the preschool fare of Hatchimals to TV romances like Homecoming for the Holidays. The brothers have diverged and come together a few times over the years, collaborating all the while as they followed unique but parallel musical paths. While Caleb studied composition at the University of Toronto, Brian earned a master's in sound recording at McGill. Now, their complementary strengths blend beautifully, and by all accounts, they're just getting started. We chat about their early days in Hong Kong and Canada, how they work as a team, the joys and challenges of their diverse slate, and how a recent flurry of work has made them much more intentional about their approach, with an eye toward balance and sustainability. If you like what you hear, please consider giving us a rating on iTunes and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. It really helps us grow and share the stories of these amazing creators. Now, please enjoy this dialogue with the brilliant brothers, Brian and Caleb Chan. Brian, Caleb, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure.
And that's how we start things. So you guys are the first composer pair we've had on the show. And not only that, but you're also brothers. What's it like working with your brother?
Oh, terrible.
Yeah, it's a big one to start off with. How many layers deep do we want to go with this one?
Well, first of all, what's the age difference between you guys?
2 years. Yeah.
Okay, so you're pretty close in age.
Yeah,
Yep.
very close. Brian's older, if nobody wonders anymore, but yeah, he is. But yeah, it's a 2-year difference, and it has, like, what is it like? Depends on how you define work, like if you mean from a professional standpoint or from just making music standpoint, because we've been doing that forever. Like as far as I can remember, we've been making music together.
Well, it's just kind of interesting because it's like, I think there's two sides to that coin. It's one is collaborative. The other side might be competitive. It might be pushing each other. It might be supporting each other. You know, there's like this whole thing that obviously we can dig into as we go through this. But it's just sort of interesting because oftentimes composers are solitary. Oftentimes composers are, lone wolves and want to do things on their own by themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe Brian, I can wind this one back and then you can continue to thread.
Sure.
Because it's impossible to talk about this without a bit of history.
Yeah.
Being brothers, I've never lived an existence where I have not known that Brian exists.
Right.
Because me following behind him 2 years, it's kind of been always that. And so for much of our early childhood, it was pretty much that. And Brian pretty much opened the door in many ways musically and in many ways from a production standpoint. Like he started the home studio at home. Like that was kind of like his passion at that point, like researching all the gear, and I just just following it along. So that's the history of us getting started in terms of making music in a digital format. We've been doing, string quartets, orchestra, like so many years prior to that. But somewhere in high school, we started doing that. And that's really at the start of us working together on similar projects.
Can you place me where you guys are? Like, when does that sort of musical journey begin for you? Because I know you guys grew up in Hong Kong and then you emigrated in 97. Yeah. So where does that whole path, how does that sort of play out?
Our mom was a piano teacher. So she taught us piano, and our sister as well, who's a much better piano player than either of us. Yeah. And at a young age, Caleb started on the violin, and me too. And then I think it's like you must have started when you're like 3 or something.
No way. Like I was much older than that. But you started violin first, but they said you couldn't sit still. Or you couldn't stand still, so they sat you down or something.
Yeah. So I switched to cello when I was about 8 or 9. And then I think we grew up in a pretty religious setting, and so we participated in choirs at church, and and actually, thinking back, that was a really good platform for us because everyone's an amateur, and you can just go every Sunday and screw it up, and it doesn't matter.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, like nobody cares. But so we would be on the same, I guess, like worship team or the same band, and just do that week in, week out. So
Yeah, concurrently with that, we were doing orchestra stuff, and this is maybe an interesting tidbit, like of the competitiveness and the support. A game we used to, do you remember this, Brian? Like a game we used to play when we were in orchestra, because I was a violinist, so I was sitting opposite of Brian, and he was a cellist. We'd be, facing each other with the conductor in between, and we'd be going through. This would probably be, week whatever of going through this piece, and by then we would know the piece pretty well, and so we would bypass the conductor and look each other in the eye, not look at our music, and see how long we can go without looking at the music, and without breaking eye contact, and see who breaks first.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And the conductor would just look, he'd be like, "What are you guys doing?" But obviously, we're like just ignoring everything that's going on, and we were just focused on, trying to see if we can memorize a piece and how far we can both take it, and pushing each other that way. But it's always so fun when that happens, just because we'd have this the brothers thing where you just like electricity goes through, and
oh, that's
and you're
great.
just laughing at something. No, everybody's just like, "What the hell?" And yeah, so that's kind of in the early days. That's a lot of kind of our dynamic and our relationship. If it was competitive, it was that way.
Your relationship to your instruments growing up, sort of where you ended up on violin and on cello respectively, was that something you felt was, you related to that and you were excited about that instrument, or was this something you felt sort of, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, or someone told me?
I think so. Going back to our parents, we have kind of like a dual like understanding of music at that time, because there was like sacred music and like all the hymns. But then on the other hand, my dad had these LDs, and there's like I think there's like a double CD of like Yo-Yo Ma's concertos, and also Lalo's, like a cassette of like Isaac Perlman's Lalo violin, or Tchaikovsky, whatever. So that was the kind of stuff that we were hearing all the time. And I think that we didn't choose our instrument specifically, or did you choose your violin? I don't remember.
No, I think, maybe at that point it was like you weren't playing violin anymore, because they sat you down and then they're like, well, we have a violin, just give it to this dude. And so maybe that's how I came into it, but I doubt it. I think maybe our parents, we never asked them specifically if they had the master plan, but they're pretty intuitive as to what we would be good at, I think, or what they want to foster and invest in. And so they're not typical in the way that you just need to play piano because it's like something you ought to do. Maybe at some point it was a little bit like that, but they also saw that we genuinely loved music, and they wanted to foster that. How we got onto, like, I still think a cello sound, it's so beautiful. And I personally would have, not that I would switch to playing a cello now, but I've always wanted to see if I could try it. And it's way too late now. Maybe it's not, but I feel it's a bit late for me to try it, but I've always loved that sound. And the violin is just sometimes when I play it myself, like it's just that thing is shrill, and maybe I just don't do a great job. And so, yeah, so it's always like a push and pull. You kind of realize like, oh, I'm fairly good at this, but something else, it's you can appreciate it from a distance too. Yeah. So yeah, Brian was an excellent cellist growing up, and our sister Esther was an excellent pianist. So we had a little trio going on, the three of us. So that was upbringing for sure.
And I mean, to add to that, we have to give credit to mom and dad, because I think they were not the typical, very strict. They were strict in practice times, but at the same time, I think they really love music themselves, and I think a lot of things in life are modeled. And my dad will sing in the shower even now, so if we didn't practice, it was because we didn't want to. And there was a time in teenage years that we didn't practice at all. Like I remember, and maybe this is a good segue into composition, but I remember like us taking shifts, because our mom and dad's bedroom was upstairs. So we would watch cartoons, Power Rangers or Animaniacs or something. And then one of us would be at the window looking out for when mom and dad would come home. Yeah. And when they came home, we would like just crazy
book it down,
book it downstairs and pretend
positions.
yeah.
Oh, that's great. I love it. And then you ended up studying out east. Caleb, you did your master's in composition at U of T, and Brian, you did a master's in sound recording at McGill. And then at some point also you ended up living together in a dorm, right? That kind of happened at the same time. How did that all work out?
Yeah, that was the dorm thing. We actually went to college together prior to that, in undergrad. So where we lived in a dorm, and this was before our masters, before we kind of tried our hand going separate ways.
Right.
We lived a lot of our time together, in a very close proximity. And so the dorm thing was probably in third year, my third year, Brian's fourth year. My second year, Brian's fourth year, last year of college. That's right? That's where that's when we lived in a dorm together, and we lugged all our gear from home. We set it all up in a dorm, and we kind of.
And that's actually the first time you guys started working together, because you did a video game at that time, and you also described this sort of like genre hopping that you guys were doing. So you're really discovering lots of different music at that time.
Yeah,
I mean, I think a lot. So just to rewind a little bit more, I think our high school also had a lot to do with our understanding of genre or whatnot. I remember, and maybe for you too, Kay, like in grade 8 or 9, I was exposed to jazz band for the first time, and we had a kind of pretty awesome band teacher in our high school that did drum circles and things that you probably wouldn't see, and musicals as well. Like Grease, we had Grease going. Anyways, I remember hearing.
Shout out Garth Bowen.
Yeah, shout out to Garth Bowen. And he was the first one that turned me on to recording too. But anyways, so I remember hearing Blowtorch on and Watermelon Man, for the first time, and it was just like, what is this music? Because that's like so beyond. And there's a groove, like there was an intro to Groove 101 probably,
right?
And man, it was like I still remember it because it just sat so long, so deep, and then shortly after that, sometime we went to Seattle, and the EMP had like this funk
experience music project.
Yeah, experience music project had this funk like what is it, like a exhibition that we and our parents bought, like this funk compilation CD, and it had like Sex Machine and Cold Sweat and like
all the stuff that we had never listened to before.
Yeah. And I think the leads were like two Asian dudes. I think I remember that, and they were dancing, and I was like, "This is so weird, but this is so cool."
Yeah.
And then at the same time, as someone turned me on to Tower of Power, and then we started listening to them on road trips as well. So that was like,
we're, just to be clear, we're very far removed from the funk genre nowadays.
Yeah.
Like we can't do that stuff, but it was a big part of us as classical musicians. Everything that was in our psyche up until that point was classical, maybe like some hymnals, some Chinese kind of folk music, and now we're getting seeping into pop, and then just on the radio. But now we're kind of diving more historically back into the time, and so that was all very brand new to us because our parents never played the Beatles on records at home or anything. They never even listened to pop music growing up in Hong Kong. So everything was like. I mean, what is this stuff? We had no idea.
But it wasn't like they weren't against it or anything. There wasn't any kind of like prohibition on that kind of music.
They just never had it around. Yeah. Right. And they didn't grow up with it. They had very different childhood upbringings. So we just never had the opportunity to grow up with that stuff. We discovered that stuff much later on in our university years and beyond that. But then, the other thread that kind of ties all this together is and how Brian started getting into recording in the first place was that he started playing cello for indie rock bands and then kind of sessioning on records, and that's how, like, Brian, you discovered recording, like the passion of recording for the first time and the feasibility of that being at home, because before it was all, I think we kind of came into it in a stage where home studios was becoming like a thing or more accessible. You don't really need hundreds of thousands of gear to kind of get upstarted. We're kind of starting that digital age a little bit. So Brian, you really came into that somewhere in high school, and I kind of just followed.
Yeah, I mean, I think early 2000s, our on top of the jazz band program, our school also had a really big battle of the bands. And I've never even heard of bands before. And there was these bands are really good, and they actually became pretty successful commercially too, but or like at least local commercially. One of them invited me to play cello for them, and then I went to some random dude's house to record music, and he is actually a really successful music producer now. Shout out to John Anderson. But we were recording in his living room, and it was, I think I fell in love with recording then, because I realized that anyone could just do it. And to backtrack, I had one experience in the studio before that, and it was into some fancy maybe Foley studio where they had like tons of U87s lying around. I didn't know what they were at the time. It was so unreachable. It was like, and the ground could lift up, and there's like glass, and it's like, oh, like check this out. You can like change your acoustic reflections or whatever. I was like, okay, this is like so far, like, but it was cool. But then I didn't think that we could do it, until I went to that other studio with the indie band, and it was not a studio. It was just like a guy's house with like baby toys lying around.
And Caleb, for you, you followed more of the producer's route, right? So you're producing bands and working more as an arranger and producer.
Yeah, I followed. I can't really say producing strictly, because that was still kind of an offshoot of composition for me at some point. But
okay,
I had actually quit music in about grade 11 and 12, quit violin lessons, because that I just didn't think I wanted to do it, and I wanted to be more academic. So I stopped doing that, and the only hobby I kept around was kind of what Brian and I were doing on the side, just recording people on the side, and like just friends and doing our own thing. And I'm a little bit more of a lone wolf that way. Like I like a kind of basement musician, bedroom musician myself. So yeah, I tinker around a lot of it was on my own at that point. And so the production stuff didn't really come until I started getting into more university years, and then realizing, I like putting pieces together. And then from there, it kind of jumped into, maybe I'm not a great performer, but I think I can write. And so I gave that a shot. I had to be honest with myself, because, like as a performer, if you want to be classical performer, you're practicing like 6 hours a day. And I just couldn't do that. I didn't think I had the raw willpower to be able to pull that through for myself. And so I started writing, and then from there it just kind of took off in a very different way too. And then at that same time, Brian was he heeded his calling to be a recording engineer. So that's kind of where we diverged in terms of us going out east, and him landing at McGill and I'm at U of T.
Right. And how did you end up in Vancouver ultimately?
We grew up here. Well, we partially grew up here. And
so you're returning.
We
basically came home.
Yeah, we came home essentially for more reasons than music, for family and other things too. But in terms of just like our route though, with composition, like we never. I don't think in screen composing, we hear this a lot in terms of people saying they fell into it, or like they just like happened on it, which is true for, I guess, in a way for us too, not in such like nonchalant and benign terms, but in a way, like it wasn't really part of our psyche until we started doing it, and that was kind of the impetus for us to continue this career, was that it wasn't really part of our system at all, but everything up until that point had in a way prepared us to be successful at it to some sort of degree, and the demands that kind of the job itself entails.
Right. So you had there's this divergence. You guys are studying different things at different universities, and you're sort of interested in different things. And then you come to Vancouver. Is that where the paths start to cross again? And is screen composition the point at which those paths cross, or is that sort of happening at different times?
It still happened differently. I think I started getting into it initially, and again, it was actually, this could have been a what if situation too, because the way that I got into it was a mutual friend of ours from college, early college days. She became a singing double on an animated series. Who at the time, the composer who was writing the songs that she was singing on, was looking for like some help and an assistant of some sort. And that happened to be the year I came back from Toronto, and that was a year that Brian had 1 year to go at McGill because his program was a little longer. And so that year difference of how Brian went back to school and I came back and took that position could have been a what if question if like Brian had taken it and I had continued something else. But yeah, one of us took it is kind of the point. And eventually when Brian came back, and maybe you should tell your side of the story, but that's kind of how I got into it, at least, and where our paths started to in this career started to start more meaningfully.
Yeah, I mean, it was because of that, and I'm really grateful for Caleb for taking it, because I had 1 year of school left and wasn't sure. And it was actually a big opportunity at the end. And because of that job, like, it opened up the world of screen composing for us. Like, you could be an assistant, for somebody, and composers had assistants, so we just didn't, like, we had no concept. And even now, like, I think composing for picture is like, it was definitely a learned thing. And it was, and I learned a lot of it from Caleb, because he was in the game for a bit longer. So,
yeah.
And it is just a game. None of this is real.
Game of Thrones.
But yeah, I mean, like, just the level of how removed it was. I remember in being in U of T and taking composition very seriously in terms of the concert stage type of chamber ensembles, orchestral, very classically kind of tradition-wise, contemporary classical. That we had lessons with all these different composers that came by, and Chen Yi was one of them, and Michael Dano was one of them too. And at that point, I had no idea who he was.
Wow.
And I had just taken up a whole bunch of student films from Sheridan to score. They're all animated stuff, and there was a kind of neat little collaboration between U of T and Sheridan at the time, where students get together and an animator would choose a composer to score a bunch of stuff for, and both would get experience that way. Mm-hmm. And so I'd taken up maybe like 6 or 7 of these little student films.
Wow.
Not knowing exactly what I was doing, but I guess like they liked my reel of how diverse it was at that time. Mm-hmm. And so I took that up, and then at that lesson with Michael, I still didn't know what was going on. This is pre Life of Pi, pre everything. And I think I showed him, I think I led the lesson with a student film that I had scored by a director who is now like Oscar winner and directing the next Pixar film.
Oh, wow.
So at that time, like, this is how far removed I was from thinking this was a big deal. Like, I just, I could just go waltz into this 30-minute lesson, show a bunch of stuff, and just get whatever, there was to take away and go home. But I didn't know at that point I'd be in a room showing one Oscar winner a work of another future Oscar winner, and here I was just like oblivious to the whole enterprise. So that was a bit of a shock coming into animation in that way of after doing a bunch of student films and had a master's degree, thinking that now I know how to write music, and being in a ringer of how to write to picture, and it's like, well, it's not so the same,
right?
And so I had to pick that up on the go for sure.
Huh, that's so interesting. Yeah. So back to how you end up working together. I mean, I think you've painted a really great picture of like your individual strengths and where there's overlap. There's obviously a lot of mutual respect and understanding, and you guys seem to communicate really well together. What does it look like when you're working on something? What does it look like when you're trying to find something? How do you sort of have discussions? Like, what do you sort of find the strength and advantage of working as a team is, and specifically as a team of brothers?
I mean, I think a lot of it is practical, because one thing that I trust completely is that Caleb. Well, maybe this is not true. Caleb gets what I'm saying musically,
Okay.
But in recent years, we had to actually talk about it more. But but I think that a strength that we have is we both have perfect pitch, so it's easy to like talk in a tonal language, and like, hey, that ends in A or whatever, and then you can pick it up. But I think that we get excited about the same music together. I think I was thinking yesterday, like, what are the perks, and why do I like working with Caleb so much? And I think one of the things is, like, just recently we there was like a marching band cue or something, and Caleb sent me a video of Carolina Crowns, and they're a brass drum corps kind of deal, but it was just so powerful that I went down the YouTube rabbit hole of watching like almost all the Carolina Crowns videos because they're incredible. Like they came together, and there's this one guy conducting in the middle, and the dynamic and and just the power in the like they stood in a circle. You got to watch it later, but if you haven't already. But anyways, I told Caleb, like, I start sending Caleb all these videos, and he was like, oh, I already watched all of them, so so I knew he was excited about the same things, and that's and at the core of it, I think that's what makes us a good team, because we're both looking for the best product together,
right?
And it's all about the music at the end.
But it has changed the dynamic in some sense. Like, I think we do, working together has gotten to a lot more fundamental places of where our differences are, and kind of things that we've always had a hint of when we were kids. But when you're interfacing at such a close level and that you do everything together, now you're really confronted with those things at a much deeper way. And some of those differences do come out, and we do have to solve them in different ways. That kind of supersedes the music. In a way, is kind of talking about those and making sure, in any partnership, you have a responsibility to the other person. And so we take that very seriously. We take the boundaries seriously too. On some level, you got to have some breaks from each other and make sure that, each other are good, but you're also good individually beyond what it means to be brothers. One of the biggest things that, this is just from my point of view, like in the partnership, was, when we were kids, it's always like, I was Brian's brother, like, as being a younger brother, like, you kind of have somebody who precedes you that way. And Brian had been always really good at just talking every one of us up, like me and my sister as well. And so we've always been, in some sense, she was like our sister, and I was his brother. And so kind of figuring that out for myself took many years to kind of differentiate, where does my personhood lie? And then Brian also had to figure that out when the tables are now flipped, and he's entered into this industry a little bit through the work that I was doing. And so that kind of work is very meaningful for us to do, some of it together, some of it apart. And when we come together with an understanding that we've got each other's back, then we can make all sorts of things happen. But yeah, that's in terms of a dynamic partnership standpoint, that's always been a crucial part of keeping us in the longevity of us working together, and which is always what we projected to, do this for a really long time, and hopefully have a good time while doing it for a long time. So
there's the level of notes you get from, the first sort of person that's your contact, like the director. Then there's might be a producer. And if you're really unlucky, a set of executive producers, 11 to 70 sitting in a room somewhere telling you what they think of your music. Is there another level then between you two where you're passing one another your ideas and how you're approaching things? And if so, what does that conversation look like? How do you actually talk to each other about each other's music?
That's a great question. There definitely is. We actually, that's built into our workflow. We give each other endless notes.
Okay.
I mean, not so much anymore right now because of how busy it is. Yeah. But especially for like a pilot episode or something, we really sit down and comment, and because the feedback helps so much for the end product. And we just have to, put our egos aside, and, this is my brother, he's younger brother commenting on my work. Right. So, and I think that what Caleb was saying, the ultimate work for us is the emotional work between us. How we, it's harder than any music really. Is to work through the boundaries of both of us emotionally, and how do we carve our own personhood into this. And I'm still learning because Caleb's now driving the bus a lot of times, or driving the whatever driver's seat.
It's a bus. Yeah,
it's a bus. Yeah. So and I have to be comfortable with that. He's been in the game for longer, and and ultimately how we respect each other and have each other's backs is the real work, and how we return to that position and have a blank canvas before every project.
That's amazing.
So. There is specifically about notes though, there is like a bit of camaraderie that we set up in terms of like, we get a bunch of notes back and one person might feel down about it, but the other person could be like, hey, you know what, let's just tackle this very pragmatically. And so you kind of give each other the push and pull that we need to draw some distance away from some of this stuff. And so it's like, as soon as notes come in, I'm usually the one that's like, okay, let's just like freaking do it right now. And Brian's like, well, like maybe we should, some of this stuff like doesn't make sense. And it's like, should we talk about some of this? And, so we give each other that check just to make sure that, we're not overstretching ourselves unreasonably, but also we get our stuff done. You can't just, loiter in one area for too long. So that's a good way for us to, and we can open each other's sessions. So if we're feeling uninspired, somebody else can pick it up. Although I think at this point we feel like, if you messed it up, it should be your responsibility to fix it. but if it comes to that, we can always trade off very easily. And those ideas are so much more fluid that way.
Is there a kind of a veto button if you feel very strongly about something you've done, or rather if you feel very strongly about what the other person's done that it isn't working? Is there like, okay, no, I'm pulling this veto power at this point. Like, I want this cue to go through. I really believe in this cue, and I know you have problems with it, but this is going to stand. Is there that kind of level of like, okay, I'm pulling the ripcord on that?
In some level, I think we give each other autonomy with it, right?
Yeah,
I think if you really believe in it, I'll back you, but only until there's a limit as to how much you want to push until we both stink.
Right.
But I'll back you until we reach that limit, and I think that goes for the both of us. It's that I think we're pretty cognizant on the relationship that we're establishing with the creatives on the other level, like the clients and the producers and the directors. That's got to be good, right? Like at the end of the day, they're gonna remember that relationship rather than how hardcore we are about our music,
right?
And so we're pretty cognizant of that, and beyond that, it's like if there's conversation that we can be had, we'll back each other first for sure, and give each other the space to really do something that we believe in. But then again, like in film scoring, we don't think that this is the only area where your creative juices should flow through. And so we take that elsewhere too. Like if we really feel really strongly about something, we do it somewhere else. We don't have to do it through this channel.
And in that vein, I mean, you both have very interesting separate careers. You have your own websites for your own individual persons, and you also have your combined Chansan's website. So is there, and this might be the wrong time to ask that because you guys are so snowed under by existing work, do you feel it's necessary to split apart and do your own things? And is that something that's sort of built into your sort of long-term process?
I mean, because at this time we're so entrenched in our work together, there's not that much time, but I think it's healthy too. And I mean, we come from different backgrounds. We have different.
We came from different backgrounds?
Sorry, we came from different musical.
Oh my God, Brian, you were adopted.
Yes.
Newsflash, you heard it here first.
Yes. Sorry. We always thought Caleb looked different. But anyways, we have our different interests in musically, so we wanted to, honor that. And no, you have to do everything together, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Brian's had a very vibrant recording career before he became a composer of this sort. So, I mean, if you wanted to jump back into that momentarily and we are entering a period where we don't need to be, so slammed with everything, then yeah, I mean, we would mutually encourage each other to do that.
Right.
And yeah, I think that is for sure a healthy aspect. So you kind of develop that own sense of self and maybe your exploration somewhere else would be more meaningful when you come together with it, in a sense that now you're rejuvenated creatively. Now this partnership has had some breathing room outside, and there's more excitement to come together. So that's on any level. That's probably something that we're going to try and maintain and keep doing throughout.
That's great. You are I think the second, if not third, person I've talked to that started a non-film related, non-client commission based project in the early part of the pandemic. And actually, I just remembered that when I talked to Maxime Goulet, he did one that was also weather related, and yours was yours is also, and it's called Good Weather. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Good Weather is a project that, so Brian and I have always, like, I think to caveat some of this is we've always done stuff that's non-film related on the side, whether it's, we do a whole ton of string arranging for songwriting artists. And we continue to do a lot of that just out of curiosity for what people are doing and something that we like to do. We session on it if we can, if it's not beyond our abilities. So yeah, on that level, we've always done stuff together, but we haven't done too much since we started writing together that was wholly separate from everything else, like untethered to anything but our own impetus to do it. And so Good Weather was an album that kind of came out of, we just ended 50 States of Fright, which is a horror series that we did through, which lasted kind of a month into pandemic. We cut it off probably around April, right? I think it was late March, early April, right after the lockdown had ended or started, and we had about 2-3 weeks to wrap that project up in post. And after that, we're kind of just like, okay, so seems like it's going to be a time where we can start to dive into some of these other things that we've wanted to do. And Good Weather came about as a way of, for one, on a practical side, we wanted to do something meaningful for our community in terms of raising some funds that could be donated to help the pandemic efforts. So the first run of that was really to make music that people could purchase and that we would donate all the proceeds to. So that was kind of the master plan at that time. And then what came out of it was a more meditative instrumental type album that doesn't sound like the new age stuff. Like we wanted to slow the beat down for ourselves. Like we had been back-to-back scoring different series that sounded very different. And now we wanted to just sit back ourselves, be with our families, just lock ourselves in the rooms when we needed to be, and then just create something and see what comes out. And yeah, so we just wrote music separately, but together. Like in much of what we've done in the past year was we did it all separately, and then we just floated it back and forth.
How did you manage to maintain? I mean, this is really interesting for anyone that's ever in a position where they're coming out of some really compressed schedules and they're working at a certain pace and they're working on certain types of material, and they think to themselves, you know what, I'd like to do something different. As you say, you want to slow the literal beat down and the pace of your work and your life down. And then yet you're doing this during the beginnings of a global pandemic, like a total crisis moment. I'm sure there must have been times when you thought, oh man, are we ever going to work again? Is this going to be like, are we in trouble? How did you manage to maintain that kind of emotional stability to be able to write like that and to do that?
Maybe there's some kind of disturbance in our music. That's why. But but I mean, part of it is that we were grateful to Canadian government for helping us at that time, because we incorporated not too long before that, and so there's some of the subsidies that helped at that time. So we weren't like, oh my God, or maybe we were just too short-sighted to see at that time. But yeah, I mean, I think that that was kind of our outlet, like our transition to feel through the music what I was feeling through my mind, because there wasn't a lot of uncertainty, and maybe I personally needed that calmness that that music would bring for me. One of the tracks is that I literally recorded the soundscape in my backyard, because there was emergency vehicles going by.
Oh, wow.
And so it was part of it. But at the same time, I kind of faced the woods in my backyard. So you can kind of hear, birds chirping. So the balance of the world was like encapsulated in that recording for me.
That's so cool. Yeah.
And like there's never any guarantee in the work that we do anyway.
That's true.
So regardless of, you'd have to be pretty self-sufficient to say that I'll without a fail, I'll be working the next 20 years, and so if we don't have that in our psyche too harshly, it seems that we can pivot away from it quite easily and do something creative with it.
Yeah.
Obviously there's a strain of like very real life strains of, keeping the lights on and having families and all that. But at the end of the day, it's like if we give ourselves that distance from the work, it helps us in other areas to invest meaningfully into those situations, like families, like relationships, like other creative work. And I think that's what we saw in a lot of people coming into the pandemic, was that now they've had to force some of that stuff away and be, and interface with those things that perhaps they've neglected. And either some of them have trouble doing it, and there's anxiety around that, or some people have, just unleashes a whole force of creative energy. And I think for us, it probably just right in between those things.
Right. Yeah. The balance of the both.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
This podcast is brought to you by the Screen Composers Guild of Canada, celebrating its 40th year in 2020. The SCGC is a national association of professional music composers and producers for film, television, and media, whose mission includes promoting the music, status, and rights for film, television, and media composers in Canada. Special thanks to the SOCAN Foundation for financial support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers. And now, back to our show. Speaking of pivoting, I want to go back to 50 States of Fright, but before that, you were writing on a preschool animation.
Yep.
And there's two big questions I have. And the first one is I want to know about your approach to that kind of writing. And then I want to hear, how did you get from that to 50 States of Fright?
Yeah. Well, even actually between that, we were on set for another show, kind of music directing some of the music stuff that was happening on set on a live musical production. So that was like a third type of weird stream that we were on. Just
so it's Julie and the Phantoms.
Chance. Yeah. It was a Netflix series that some friends of ours had enlisted our help on. But yeah, in terms of animation and horror, there's actually quite a large similarity in terms of the same way that comedy and horror shares a strain of timing is so important. You can't just slap on like a 3-minute cue without any intention of how it interfaces with the picture and have it just work emotionally. There are very specific things that you need to hit and a very specific timing for those things.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of an ingrained learning from both, having done a ton of animation in the past and now learning to do horror in a way. And we haven't done a whole ton of horror at all up until that point. So it was really just porting those ideas that we can't look at this like it's a completely different beast, even though it was stylistically and experimentally. But in many ways, we're carrying the same set of toolkit that we have innately established, and then being able to implement them in a different way. And that's kind of the easy way of navigating or pivoting through different channels and genres and stylistic differences, which is something that turns out, like we were saying earlier, like in our upbringing, turns out something that we're perhaps maybe more apt to doing and going through different genres and being true to that genre and not really cheapening it for our own sake. So that in a way is kind of built into our musical journeys anyway. And so it wasn't too big of a stretch. It was actually quite exciting to kind of go from one to another and being able to experiment in a totally different way. But yeah, scoring that 50 States itself was it's almost like scoring 9 different films, because every single episode was a different palette, different style,
Yeah.
different sorts of sentiments, and so in itself was already like
And different directors too. You're not working with the same
exactly.
lead each time either, and you're really just leaning on the editors to sort of give you a through line on that.
Exactly. Yeah, and so I think we had, the filmmakers really pulled most of the creative weight in that one, and we had to learn and reestablish a relationship with each one of those filmmakers, and then the editors, like you said, was like I think they were rotating about 3 editors on that show.
I think, yeah.
And they split up between filmmakers in different episodes, and so they became in part our through line, and that's a relationship that's been valuable in terms of when everything else seems sort of disconnected. Like, how do you centralize some of the slots? And our editors became, or the picture editors became a way in which we kind of have that conversation, and seeing how they pace certain things and the music that they chose for the temp in some cases was pretty pivotal to how we structured our creative energy around.
I mean, if I think about, when someone says, well, okay, you can work on a film and it's 5 minutes long, or you can work on a film and it's half an hour long. What's the difference going to be in terms of cost? Well, I mean, it's all about the mental energy that I spend with the director to determine what the sound is, to figure out what the concept is, to build that relationship, to gain that trust, then to sit with the template, to work on the sounds, develop the themes, blah, 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 blah. In a way, going from 5 minutes to the extra 25, that's the easy part in a sense. The hard part is all in the beginning. Walk me through how much time you had, and how was that an insanely compressed schedule to work on those shows, on those episodes, and to like build that trust again, and to build a new concept and template?
So each one of the episodes were split up into 3 mini episodes, because at that time it was supposed to be premiering on Quibi, which failed as a platform. But the whole idea of Quibi was that you can watch these things in bite-sized kind of like 5 to 10 minute sittings. And so each one of those was like 5 to 10 minutes, and you might have 2 or 3 of them strung together to create one longer story. And we maybe had 2 weeks to get the whole story done, which overlapping 2 weeks. So
it was like waterfall.
The next one. Yeah, it was
Wow.
waterfall.
Yeah.
And then, so, I mean, some of it was pretty intuitive. Some of it was a lot more sound designy, and some of it, I think one episode that you primarily did, Brian, that one was quite sound designy in terms of like they wanted a lot of drone underscoring through, and just like a jump scare, and then drone, jump scare, build, drone. So that like almost in a way was a lot of music, but a lot of it was also just sound design, and
like
then
more gestural for sure.
Yeah. And then one of them was like they wanted like a John Williams-y, Spielberg-esque. Obviously they throw around these large concept. At this point, like John Williams is almost like a concept. And so so that was the kind of the idea behind that one, and that one took a while. And you might have had to go off to Hawaii for that one too.
I mean, so they had they put in like for a montage sequence like fantasy impromptu, and I was like, can you guys create that? And we're like,
no problem.
And actually Caleb wrote like kind of like a piano concerto kind of similar to that.
And then they got cut. They're like, no, actually we actually just want fantasy impromptu at the end of the day. So we had to reperform that. But yeah, I mean, in terms of timeline, it was with the 2 people it was bearable for sure. And then especially by the end, there seemed to be so much open space with the pandemic happening that now like the rest of life was all of a sudden halted. And really the struggle that we were dealing with, just the anxiety of that, and then finishing up in 2-3 weeks after that. So but with 2 people, it doesn't amount to twice as fast, but it does amount to being able to stick it out for a little longer and do things a little bit quicker, for sure.
Listening to your demo reel, which is so impressive, and it's just got this kind of I don't know. It's hard to sort of put words to it, but it's very organic. It's got this authenticity to it. It just feels like it's the music stands apart from picture, and it has this kind of like integrative kind of thing where it all makes sense together as a body of work. And yet you have had the opportunity to work on everything from Raimi's 50 States of Fright, which is a horror anthology, to rom-coms and animation, and for all and it's not small stuff either. It's big stuff for DreamWorks and Netflix and everything else.
Yeah.
I have my own senses when I'm listening to your demos. And then when you said that, what you said when we were discussing earlier, that you don't approach preschool music or a horror anthology any different in terms of the attention that you're giving it and the maturity with which you're approaching the music. You're not underplaying something for a preschooler. You're going, no, we're not going to go for the cliche. We're not going to go for the obvious. We're going to assume that they're going to understand, and the emotional language is going to be similar. So I would point to that. But do you have any insights on what you think has made it possible for you to do what I think a lot of other composers wish they could do, but oftentimes get pigeonholed?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean,
I think
that's a hard question to put into words. Can you put it into words in terms of, because all I can think at the top of my head is it's just because we're doing it, but you want to be more precise.
No, I mean, I think there's some sort of intentionality to be somewhat of a chameleon, because we started out as session musicians, and you kind of have to be in a way malleable, because at the end of the day, the music isn't yours, and you're trying to serve, whoever artist's vision. Even though we're not country players or whatever, you gotta fake it as real as you can be, and it comes to a point where you start believing in it too, for yourself. And I don't know, and maybe this is a more philosophical than we like to make it, but at the end of the day, we also get thrown work from all sorts of angles. Maybe because we had that kind of demo reel, but we try to, I think, staying authentic to whatever gets thrown at us is a very important and crux of how we work. So if it's a rom-com, then we're in the rom-com style, and we're trying to see, hey, what makes a rom-com good? And why is this genre, what in this genre makes this genre good? And I think if we keep asking that, then it translates to other genres too, even though we may not be able to do it so well,
I think all that makes sense. You're getting the work because you've done it. So you do have a track record, and then you are sort of approaching it with this elevated mindset that says, just because some other people might do this cheaply, or because this has a bad reputation for being cheap, that's not going to be our approach. We're going to look at this and try and push it as far as we can.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, too, as composers and as creative people, there's an element of integrity that every one of us needs to hold in order to continue doing this over a long stretch. And I think that's something that we had, in a way, established earlier on in terms of, okay, what does this mean for me to be a composer and for me to have integrity in this business? Knowing that it's very easy to cheap out in a way. It's very easy to kind of not give it a fair shot, whatever project you're going at. And there are, I gotta admit, there are times where we have to do that. There's just not enough budget or time. But for any self-respecting creative individual, you owe it to yourself to do right by yourself first, and then channel that into whatever else we do. I mean, I remember there's an old interview with Eminem, the rapper, and he was saying the day that I don't write my own lines is the day that I need to put the pen down and kind of just give it up. And that's kind of in a way how we feel about the music is the way, and the day that we can't do it ourselves, and the day that we don't feel that we're serving our own integrity well, then I think it's a day that we got to make some changes, or we're not right for the project, and we have to be able to admit that, or just find a different solution that works. And so that's kind of been a pretty consistent through line for how we think about the work as well.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up a good point, because in animation there's a lot of spoofs that happen, and we're becoming more and more aware of what we should or shouldn't spoof, because we just aren't of that background, or are we're not doing the due respect to that music. And like even there's like I think there's like a kung fu scene in one of the shows, and we're like, okay, are we doing this? And and so, and actually we end up not, but we just did it like in 80s. But, questions like that is, central to now our workflow, because so much of it happens. Yeah.
And I've done a ton of spoof in my past that I'm now not proud of.
Yeah.
Like I've made that mistake so many times that, in retrospect, I'm like, damn, I should have given that more thought. And now the learning curve is to kind of undo some of that, because it's been such a normalized thing, especially in animation, that like we've literally in a series that we're currently working on, we've done the same spoof 5 times, the same type of spoof, just across 3 shows. The same scene essentially 5 times played out in different ways in different contexts.
Right.
But it wasn't technically a problematic spoof, but still, like, you get tons of reoccurrences of this sort of conventional type of thing that you can just turn on autopilot and score. And so that's sort of the things that, like, now we're encountering those problems again. Like, how can we do it in a different way that's still more satisfying to us? Because nobody's gonna give a shit at the end of the day. It's like, if you do it, you score it. It was supposed to be this way and you did it this way, it's fine. But seeing we can, like, push it a little bit for ourselves, and not too much to kind of be off-putting, but just a little bit more, just for our own sake, to make it worthwhile to score. So
I don't know why this pops into my head again when you said that no one cares, because I don't know if that's true, because I have to say, like, again, and this came up in the podcast, the first episode of the podcast, when I was talking to Min, we both have the original Tron as a touchstone for both of us. I mean, Wendy Carlos's score for that is just so completely out there in terms of what a Disney score normally sounds like. Sure. And it's atonal, it's dissonant, it's clashing tonalities and clashing textures, and it's a weird mix of orchestra and synthesizer. And as a kid, I just thought, this is so cool. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what the language was, but I was just like, if you want me to believe in this alternate universe where a man can, live inside a computer and be this, like, this hero in a digital space. Well, this music's absolutely doing that. That is totally telling the story. And I still go back to that and I go, you know what? Had Carlos taken, or had they chosen a different composer, a different direction and done the obvious thing and just gone for a sort of like quirky, fun adventure score, I don't think it would have stuck with me. That score really stuck with me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to be corrected on that point in terms of like a large scale conceptualization of doing something different. For sure makes a huge perceptual difference on the other side. I think maybe more I'm alluding to is the really small stuff that like, in terms of, should I score an augmented seventh here, or should I find a tetrachord that works a little bit better for my own sake? I think maybe those are the decisions that in the end, it might not make a giant difference as to how that might be perceived. But it makes a difference for us in terms of now I've been able to implement this in a new way.
Absolutely.
And there's always a time and place in a project to do that on. And sometimes the give isn't so much. But yeah, it's those little small battles that make it.
It was more meant as a compliment to what I think you guys are achieving, as opposed to an attempt to make you see it differently. But you bring up an interesting point, which is, and it's sort of a point that's been coming up a lot, which is this: you're juggling and balancing and trying to figure out where to put attention and energy and where to save. And it could be, and it can be in so many different directions. And you guys have already talked about the importance of family and the importance of this emotional part of the journey that is both the business and artistic side, and also your relationship with each other, and I'm sure with your collaborators. And I want to talk about this, something that we talked about in the session that we had before we jumped on the podcast. And there was a lot of different touch points, but this idea of an emotional journey and how important it is to do that work, and that being critical to your success. And then also what you had some fairly strong opinions about what I think we're seeing come out now as a questioning of the glorification of the grind.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly bad at this because I find that I romanticize the suffering artists all the time, like every
Right.
day. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I'm working 12 hours a day. Like, look at me, And I find that I return to it every day when I'm working for some weird reason for my own ego. And one of the things that I've found helpful, and I'm still finding that I have to choose, is to know when I'm unproductive, and stop the cue bashing, essentially.
Yeah.
And say, like yesterday, in the afternoon I was useless, and normally I would go, let's just try it for another couple of hours, but I was like, okay, I need to sleep.
Yeah.
And I have I have a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old, and so we're in the thick of it as well. But like, I think recognizing that and being able to name it for yourself, or for myself anyways, have been important for my mental health. Will I be more stressed later? Maybe, but like, this is more important to know now, for me. And so I went to bed and they were cutting the lawn, so I didn't, it was hard, but I still made that choice and I was proud.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the part, like, returning to doing things in partnership is keeping that responsibility in check, so that at any turn you're not offloading that burden onto your partner in terms of they need to now figure that out for yourself. I mean, we can provide a very boundary support for each other in terms of like, hey, like if I get a text like, hey, need to sleep, like, yeah, go sleep. That's the sort of just one step of really quick external validation for self-preservation that is important. But also, like, beyond that, it's we need to take some of that aside, apart from the work, so that we are self-preserving on our own, without each other, so that when we come together, there's a lot more magic that can happen. And for myself, I find it a lot easier to compose when I'm not facing the desk all the time. Like, some of my best ideas have come from, like, drive. And so, like, on my phone, there'd be all these, like, whisper murmur recordings of just like just me trying to sing into it, and like count myself in, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'd whisper some, like, gibberish that only I could probably understand and decode later. But yeah, I know Brian is very much the same way. Like, he's got, like, the I'm sure a lot of us do it that way. It's like when we're away from it, sometimes we just get that click, and that sort of saves us time when we're back in the grind, so to speak, and in the studio. But yeah, I mean, there's also the time and place to record that, but also a time and place to just turn it off and be, okay, you know what? Like, at this point, I'm gonna be in the present of being with my family, or being in nature, or whatever it is that we're doing. And I think that's been a constant struggle for all of us to keep, and more so now because we're now accountable to each other, and having to figure that out for each other. To make this work for a long time. And so, yeah, I'm sure everybody has a different solution. I'd be interested to hear yours, like how you kind of encounter that struggle for yourself and how you draw those spaces.
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge what you guys are talking about, because I think there's two things you're doing. First of all, you're being very intentional about this, and I know you're referring to it as a struggle. I think it's just the challenge, and when you're aware of what it is, and you start to put effort into it. I mean, things are always changing. The goalposts are moving. The mountain you get to a plateau, and you see how far more you can go. And as you're doing this sort of like this work to get a handle on your emotional states, and to be better at metacognition, and to allow yourself space to to be a person, to be a human being, and to experience life beyond sitting in your desk and working constantly. That's the important work, and it is challenging. It's hard to be aware of these things, but I think it's far more painful and more struggle to not be aware, and then to suffer the consequences and go, right. Why is this happening? Why do I feel so terrible? Why am I not as effective as I could be?
Yeah, and a lot of it, I think it's a side byproduct of the ability or the desire to think about your life and your work apart from the work aspect, like when you're actually doing it.
Yeah.
I remember for myself coming out of university and now jumping into this and having a bit of dissonance between, I wanted to be a classical contemporary composer for concert stage, and now I'm thrust into the studio mode where I'm writing cartoons. Like, how do I rectify that? Why am I doing what it is that I'm doing? Is it more than just the bills? Is it more than, or is it really just the bills? And having a framework in which we can operate and create that very, very, on one hand, it needs to be very down packed. On the other hand, it needs to have space to evolve over time. But having that at any point in time makes it so that your work can sit in something that is meaningful and that you'll never burn out. Because I think a lot of the issue that younger composers are facing is it's a huge burnout rate.
Yeah.
People die for this job, and and in some senses literally, and in some sense like they just can't upkeep the tempo that it needs to be at some points. But even if you're working like a 16-hour workday, what does that mean? Like if it doesn't mean that now your value is inherently in a 16 workday, you can still work a 16 workday and feel at some point that you can disconnect from it, and you can still have a feeling of self apart from that. And so it's not really necessarily always bound to the amount of work that's being put in. It's the perception of that for yourself and how you feel that on a very deep level and fundamental level. I think there's a lot more awareness these days on how that interacts and interfaces with the rest of life. And so that's been a really great conversation to have for sure.
This is a giant topic. And I think that what Caleb touched on at the end, I think is something that we all should be asking. And I don't ask enough. Like where does my ultimate value lie? Where does my security, comfort, and need for approval lie? And how come I'm putting so much of it in my music and being so precious about it? And I think that I'm really bad at it, but that's a work to ask that constantly to myself, and like look at my family and be like, hey, these are people, right?
Yeah.
And so
the great thing is that out of that, like the greater music, or maybe it's hard to qualify music in terms of good or bad, but sometimes the stuff that we make when it comes from a place of that comfort and knowing and certainty for ourselves is better, or the effort is less, or a combination of those two things. And so at any juncture, it's a meaningful self dialogue that constantly should take place.
Yeah. I think this is so important, and I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. You guys are open to it, because this is something that I've become more and more interested in. I mean, for a long time, I've been very invested in the work to, mostly what I would call metacognition, thinking about thinking. Why do I have these states? Why am I feeling this way? What does that mean? Where does it come from? How can I manage it?
Yeah.
And more recently, I've been thinking a lot about the way we do the work that we do, and I'm going to call them myths, the mythologies that we keep perpetuating in our industry about what it takes, what is normalized, what does hard work look like, what does success look like.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm turning my sights to other things, because I don't think the answer is in really the way that anyone in our industry does it. Yeah. I've become so fascinated by sports psychology and sports, in physiology and biomechanics and things like that. And, I think therein lies some of the answers. When I look at what sports does, they have coaching. So if you're having a rough day, if you're mentally unstable, if you don't know whether your workouts and your diet is working well enough to support high efficiency and productivity and outcomes, you have a coach that sits there and goes, okay, I can give you the wide angle. I can give you the big, broad picture of this. I can help you see your blind spots, and we'll work together. Yeah. If you're feeling down, I'll bring you up. If you're getting too egotistical, I'll pull you down. Yeah. We have this in sports, they have this whole cycle of high output and then recovery and rest. And what do you do when you are resting, right? There's this like ice bath. Well, and literally sometimes, right? It's what we do is, in a way, a very athletic endeavor. I mean, the amount of calories your brain is crunching through when you're when you're in a synthesizing state, you're making stuff. Right. It's enormous amount of energy deficit that you go into, and how you manage those flow states and the
Right.
rise and fall of your energy throughout a day. And when you sort of are able to make impact, when you have to pull back, go take a nap. And to sort of say, if we could look at those things and go, yes, you need rest and recovery. You need both of those things. You can sprint, but then you need to take a break. You can go hard and then you need to like refuel. And refueling could be, as you guys are saying, creatively too, get away from the screen, take something else in, get a new input. I think if we can start to normalize this kind of thing, we can start to assuage some of this, like, what's becoming more endemic to not only the music industry, but I think a lot of other industries and entrepreneurship in general, which is burnout, which is mental health challenges that go beyond just your everyday anxiety.
And I mean, like in terms of, sorry to interject a bit.
No,
like,
it's great.
Like it is true that work ethic it is probably the most consistent line to success in a way of how it's conventionally defined.
Sure.
I think the conversation is probably now, rightfully so, being skewed more towards a more fundamental understanding of why that work ethic works and how sustainable that work ethic is. Because there are people that can work 12 to 16 hours a day and be successful and feel like their boundaries are met and that they're fulfilling all their other needs in life. And we've tend to in this life and also in sports in this world glorify just the surface work, but not the maybe the deeper work that it takes to get to that mental strength and build that up. And now I think it's been more realized, like, okay, not everybody can do it at that rate, but everybody can take away from what that underlying undercurrent of mental support means and have lessons in that area of discourse rather than just how do you work 16 hours a day, because not everybody can. And I know for myself, I need at least like 8 to 9 hours of sleep a day.
Yeah.
Just to feel like I'm okay. And I know a lot of people only need 5 to 6. And I can't technically on hours of day, I can't compete with that. Like if they only need 6 and biologically I need 9, I'm already 3 hours behind. But, of those hours that I have, like, what does that mean for me? And individualizing that, being specific about that is technically probably a more important question to have.
Right. I mean, I think that that's a very good point. It's an individual thing. Each person is different. Some people, I mean, it depends on age, right? Younger people can grind harder than older people can, right? Yeah. Regarding work ethic, I don't think work ethic is really the question, because to me, work ethic is I put in 4 hours today and I know that's as much as I'm going to be able to put out. And I've done 4 really great hours. Yeah. Yeah. And now I need to go and do something else to refuel so that tomorrow I can do 8 or whatever. And if you can show up that way and tell whoever you're working with or for, I'm done now. I'm no longer available because I need to go refuel. To say, well, I'm not going to run another sprint for you because I'm on rest now. I'm icing my knee. No one's going to say, get back out there right now. Like, go do your workout. They're really, no, you need to rest. You're not going to be effective otherwise. I think that's what we should see as good work ethic.
Right.
Yeah, and then as you say, this whole idea of like, building up that doing the work, doing that emotional work, and being, I mean, this is all to me the key to being effective and the key to being able to do far more with far less. Yeah, I'm an 8 to 10 hours a night because I know that if I go to bed with a problem, I wake up with a solution. If I, as Brian was saying earlier, slam it and try and Q bash through it, never works. It's just a disaster. And all I end up is more frustrated and no solutions.
Completely.
Take a break,
100%.
take a nap, go sleep it, work on something else. Work on something that's just like data entry or whatever. If you do a mix or something, it doesn't require you to like come up with new solutions.
Yeah. That's why like to-do lists are like a death wish for some people. Like I think for me, it's having a to-do list kind of kills everything. It's more about like if I say what I'm going to do, I'm going to do it rather than making a to-do list.
Right.
Like sometimes, because to-do lists are endless. Like you can write a list of like 20,000 items and you can get through 5 a day and you'll put 5 more at the end of the day.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, like if you can reframe that in terms of, I'm going to put in 2 hours of dedicated writing time.
Yes.
And will I follow through? That's a much more easier question to track from a mental perspective than having to like now write a certain amount of music in that certain amount of time. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, like if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And if I follow through with that, then I'm good, and no matter what perhaps the results are at the end of that time. So that's,
You might already know this, but that's actually called time blocking.
oh, there, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, where you don't have a to-do list. You just have, I will write from this time to this time. I'll write, do emails from this time to this time. I'll do, marketing from this time to this time. And you get as much done as you get done within that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then, because I mean, we're notoriously bad at being able to estimate how long things will take us to do. And I know for myself, if I make a to-do list, one of them will be finish album. That'll be like one item. Like what, how, that's
Impossible. Yeah.
Good job.
It's unreachable. Yeah.
Guess what? You fail every single day. You're such a failure.
Yeah. You'd be a good failure though, because you had something on the list.
Yeah.
That's more aspiration than some of us over here.
Yeah. So with all that in mind, what do you have a picture? Some people have vision boards and they put, they have put images of what they want in their lives. Like it can be material things, or it can be experiences, or it can be situations, or it can be opportunities. Or they have, they have these big documents where they write all their sort of imaginings about what 5 years looks like, what 10 years looks like. Do you guys have a solid picture of where you want to go?
That's on the to-do list.
To-do list, right. You just time block that out.
Yeah, I don't know. Like a vision, that's also kind of an area we haven't ventured in terms of, I think we all have individual sort of ideas as to where we want things to be. But then we push back against that and just say, maybe we should focus on, this is so cliche, like the journey. And like just I feel that if we set our, instead of setting the goals, set our next step, we will eventually reach whatever goal we had originally intended. I don't know if that makes any sense. But if we kind of just focus on, and we didn't even really talk about this, Bri, but this is like my opinion on it, if you care.
Journey of 1,000 steps starts with one step.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like if you get the path right,
yeah,
where you'll end up is essentially going to be where you wanted. But the destination isn't so much, the discussion rather than how we're doing it. And I've always been more precious about how we're doing things. If we're doing it in a healthy way, if we're writing the music we want to write, and if we're doing that, eventually we'll get to wherever that F it is that we dream of being, and maybe it'll even take us to a better spot. And I think that's been a more apparent in our careers, is that if we focus on that, we actually end up in places that end up being better. Because if you wind this whole thing back, everything is random. Like we're given a set of genes that we didn't choose. We grew up a certain way that we didn't choose. We were lucky a few times and we worked hard a few times, and everything just kind of lined up according to some of those stuff. But in any situation, I don't think we really dreamed of exactly being a certain space. I don't know if you feel that way too, Bri, with
yeah, I mean,
how we ended up where we are and where we're going.
It's so much of it is luck and being grateful for it. But you're absolutely right in the sense that if we focus on how we're doing the thing rather than the goal itself, it ends up being in our favor a lot more. Because I find myself, anyways, if I'm too farsighted, or if I just want the goal, then I forget about what's in front of me, and I do it like really shitty. So
yeah, but we've been pretty good check and balance with that, because Brian does, like, the difference between us is essentially that too.
Yeah, idealist and big dreamer.
Yeah, but we need that input for me too, because that's how this whole thing really started, was like your dream of starting a studio, and then I'm like, okay, well, let's just do it one step at a time and see what happens. And now your dream is like kind of like it's come to some sort of fruition, and we kind of didn't even know how we got here in some ways until we really reflect on it. But yeah.
Well, I think that all sounds amazing, and certainly the proof is in the pudding. You guys are doing really well right now, working on brilliant stuff, and doing it the way you want to do it. It sounds like, and your description of being in that moment, or being in the moment, and always checks and balances, figuring out whether it's working or not. How do you want to change it? You're very intentional and conscious about how you're moving through all this stuff. And there's, as you say, one step at a time. There is a lot of, most of what happens seems to be out of our control, other than how we do the things we do.
Yeah.
And I think that to me sounds like an absolutely brilliant way to move through all of that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's always like everything's.
I'll check back in with you in 10 years, and we'll make a determination on whether you're a failure or a success. It'll be one or the other. There's no in between.
There's no in between. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, I mean, for anybody in creative path, it's we're not of the type to really brand ourselves very specifically. Some people can, and some people probably should, but for our own sake, we rather not venture into that because it does put us in a place where we don't want to be, and so kind of fluid in that aspect. But yeah, it just seems to work for us. Can't prescribe that for many people, or as you know, the paths are so different for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you guys working on that's new and exciting?
We have 3 animated series on the go right now, which is the most we've ever done. Can't talk about 2 of them. One of them is the next one. One of the other ones is the Angry Birds series coming up on Netflix. Amazing. Which we're really excited about.
Yeah.
And they just told us we could talk about it. Obviously, no show content, but it's a more North American version with really cool stories and cool characters. And the characters actually talk now. So
yeah, they have voices. Yeah,
they have voices.
Very neat show. Yeah, good mix of like comedy and heart on that one. There's other 2 that we're doing with DreamWorks.
Amazing.
Also animated series, and those 2 are also fantastic. And one of them is we're excited about one of them for the reasons that it's something that our kids can watch.
Cool.
And the other one also our kids can watch that too, but that one's got more of a story that's kind of quirky, and so all 3 are so different in terms of stylistic approach. And so yeah, again, it affords us to be able to excel at what we're good at, which is just doing random things and figuring out how to do things differently, or different things concurrently. And so so that's kind of on our plates right now.
Can we talk about the style differences? Okay.
Yeah, we can probably.
One of them. So,
or you can edit.
We'll just say it and then we'll see.
Yeah.
The obviously Angry Birds is like silly and fun and games, lots of twangy stuff, and then one of the other ones is like medieval world.
Oh, cool!
And then like a timeless one. So medieval.
Like it's its own brand of medieval, really. And then with like lots of imaginative, outside the box kind of magic. And then the last one is like trap meets spy heist.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a big breadth of different stuff.
So those 3 are going at the same time. We have to.
Yeah.
Wow. So you're definitely not getting bored. That's for sure.
No. Yeah. Not at all. In fact, it kind of heightens, now like doing 3 at the same time, it heightens in some ways, like creatively, other aspects. Like for me at least, now I want to do something that's completely different too. Like when this is all over, I'm kind of looking forward to kind of going in a different direction away from all of this. But in the meantime, it's super satisfying to do all 3 of these things. And I think one thing that animation is still kind of very strong in is the orchestral backbone that a lot of shows still continue to need and crave for. And so that kind of puts us in a great spot of having to write adventure music very orchestrally, which is something that I love to do, and something that I think it's good to do seriously. It helps sharpen our tools and kind of do it quickly, but in that way, it kind of checks off a lot of our current wants and desires and what we want to do. But we'll see again. Again, after this, maybe an indie film, maybe something else. Who knows?
That sounds great. Well, guys, this has been an absolute pleasure. I would normally ask you if you have any parting words, but I feel like you've already given us so much interesting stuff and great words of advice and insight and perspective. in terms of how you guys approach everything you do, both from an artistic and just that being really cool people and very enlightened emotionally, which is really cool to see. And so this has also been a super fun conversation for me to have. So thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules. Where can people follow you if they want to find out more?
We have a loosely upkept website that we upkeep probably like when anything is finished, and we'll just put it up there. So we have a website, that's www.chansounds.com, and we post stuff there once in a while. And then individually we have social media that we also. I'm trying to pick up a little bit more of that. I don't know.
You're better at that than me. Yeah.
Social media, it's there's some sort of polarizing opinions on that, but we have that as well. And so that's basically as best as we get in terms of putting ourselves out there. Everything else is just, what we've done in the past and what you will see. 2 of our shows will go up on Netflix, and I think the other one will go up on Apple TV probably next year. So
amazing. We'll definitely update everyone when that stuff comes out so they can check it out and learn about you through the music. So in the meantime, I'll let you get back to it. Thanks again for taking the time. This has been super tremendous.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider showing your support by giving the show a 5-star rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. The Screen Composer Studio is produced by myself, Adrian Ellis. Graphics and post-production assistance by Nick Grimshaw. Special thanks to our managing director, Tanya Dedrick, as well as Charlie Finley, Elizabeth Hannon, and Guggan Singh for their support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers, or reach out at tscs@screencomposers.ca.